How do we know ourselves? I don't know if you have ever focused on this issue, how the way in which you know truly yourself. Clearly as thinking beings, because we are intellectual, our knowledge of ourselves truly is a knowledge of us as thinking beings, is a knowledge of our own thought somehow. And how does that work? I mean, sometimes when we focus on the knowledge of ourselves, we might just watch like a movie in our mind, like for example, focusing on ourselves while we were on vacation in that particular island. And definitely it's some kind of knowledge, but in a sense, if you think about it, it's a dead knowledge. I mean, we can always think of our own ideas. We produce some ideas in our minds, and then we can put themselves in front of our mind's eye and focus on these ideas, which may be false, even about ourselves. Maybe we thought that we were particularly witty and pleasant in that island, and people really didn't think so, and we were really unpleasant and not really friendly. So our knowledge can be false, but this is not the main point. The main point is that this knowledge, like in a movie, is a dead knowledge. Our true knowledge of ourselves is the knowledge we experience in the act of knowing, is the real one. So right now, how do I know myself? And it's interesting that when Aquinas approaches this issue in his work, he explains that our knowledge of ourselves is mediate, is not immediate. He says that unlike God and the angels, our intellect is made to know things through sensible, material things, material nature. So our intellectual knowledge goes through our senses, so our senses put in our mind's eye our first object of knowledge, the so-called object of first intention. Then we can produce ideas and focus on these ideas. It's called technically the object of second intention, because we go back to something that is already in our mind, it's already been formed, we have it in our minds, and then we can focus on it. But the first intention, the real knowledge of us as acting beings, is a knowledge of material, of the nature of material things, quiditas rei materialis in Latin, and in Aquinas is Latin. And that means that truly our knowledge of ourselves is a perception of us as knowing beings, but we can only know ourselves in the act of knowing something else, in the real experience. And then we can try to, of course, take the idea that we produced and look at it back and figure out some features of something, but the real action is in the act of knowing something else, and this something else is material, including our body, but it goes through our senses. So if that's true, it gives a very interesting perspective to evaluate the differences between classical philosophy and modern philosophy, because modern philosophy starts with the idea that our first certainty is the perception of our intellectual knowledge of ourselves as thinking beings, thinking animals. This is Descartes' experiment. But this is interesting. If this is the first certainty of our minds, but if the act of knowing ourselves, perceiving ourselves as thinking beings, and knowing our own will as inclined to something we want, in the act of being inclined to it, this is the real knowledge of our will and our intellect. So if that happens in the act of knowing some material things through our senses, and if senses are deceitful, so if everything is deceitful in the material world and through our senses, but we know our intellectual life in immediate mode through the senses, well, that puts in doubt even our own perception of us as thinking beings, and creates a huge gap between classical and modern philosophy. But in this case, just think of your own experience. Try to focus on your own act of knowledge, of you as a thinking person, and try to figure out if you can perceive yourself as a thinking person directly or indirectly, which is an interesting thought experiment to make sometimes.